It didn't happen.
Yeah, you're up, Danny. I think it is live.
Is it? Should be able to click and okay. Well, hello, everybody in Fire Engineering Nation. Welcome to another edition of Straight Talk. Got my co-host, Rob Fisher, Battalion Chief out of Snohomish, Washington, and a few guests that I've known for quite some time. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. But first, really the topic today is going to be in regards to EAP and peer support. You're going to hear from some of the leaders in that, Frank Leto from New York, Drew Kane from New York, and Jerry Morrison out of Fairfax. And certainly I want Rob Fisher to share his opinion. So just to get us start off, Frank, you want to just introduce yourself and your position and how long you've been in the fire service and what do you do?
Sure, Dan. Again, my name is Frank Leto. I'm a captain here at FDMY and the Deputy Director of the Counseling Service Unit. I've been on FDMY for the last 36 years. Currently, as a Deputy Director of the Counseling Unit, we have 5 different locations. We have about 90 employees, all working to support the members of their family at FDMY.
Thanks, Frank. Drew?
Good morning. Hi, Dan. Hi, everyone. My name is Drew Kane. I'm a lieutenant in the New York City Fire Department, coming up on 25 years. I currently run our substance abuse program, which is the addiction transition program. I'm a licensed clinical social worker as well as a certified alcohol substance abuse counselor. I've been working with the EAP, the Counseling Service Unit in New York, for about 12, 13 years now.
Thanks, Drew. And Jerry from Fairfax?
Jerry Morrison, captain down here in Fairfax, in my 38th year on the job. I'm involved in our behavioral health, our EAP, and our peer support.
Very good. Rob?
Well, you want me to introduce myself, or you want to just talk?
You tell me. Give you an opportunity.
My name's Rob Fisher. I'm co-hosting with Dan, and I'm a peer support coordinator in Snohomish County, which is a community about 30 miles north of the city of Seattle. Smaller organization. I think I can tell you right now, we have less people on duty on a shift than FDNY has in their program. So kind of give a perspective from the smaller organization.
Very good. Well, welcome everybody. So thanks for coming. Thanks for being here and sharing with the people that are listening. And this is live streamed and it's also being recorded for anybody that can't make it at this time. Really, again, what I kind of wanted and invited you here for is to talk about EAP and peer support. Now, for myself, I've been a certified addictions counselor since 1991. I've been in the field of addiction and mental health since 1986. So I don't think I'm the oldest one here, but that puts me back a bit. I've been a member of the IFF Labor EAP Committee for the last 18 years or 19 years with Frank, and the lead for our peer support team in Chicago for about 10 years. Although we did have peer support, we just didn't formalize it in a sense of peer support. It was really members helping members, or a member assistant program, and I led our EAP program for the Chicago Firefighters Union for 14 years. So myself, Frank, Drew, Jerry, we've been doing this for combined well over 100 years or so. These are the people that if there's a question or a history about what we're doing, are the people to ask, and that's why I invited them to be a part of this. So really, with that said, I wanted to ask you, Frank, what led you to getting involved in EAP and peer support? And those things could be synonymous, or you could cover one of those topics.
Sure. FDMY has had a program probably since the early 60s. it started getting more formalized in the early 80s. I came on in 83. I was involved in a line of duty death in 1987, and there was some support. There was limited support for our members. So I started asking questions and started to get involved. Back then, we had CISM being taught at FDMY, so we developed a CISM program. But that quickly changed into a peer support model. So by probably the mid 90s, we were using peer support. We weren't calling it that. We were doing. Then 9/11 occurred. We had support from all around the country, and we were using peers from practically every city in the country coming here and helping us. So our program really became more formalized and right after 9/11, where we used peer support as the outreach to bring members, to let members know that what was going on in at the counseling service unit, let them know the services that were available, and also to get them to the help that they needed.
Yeah, and Drew, how long have you been involved with the FDNY Counseling Center?
It's about 12 or 13 years now. I got on the job in 94. I think I first started working here in about 2003, 2004, more part-time. I worked in our substance abuse program, which we have a unique situation here in New York where we have basically, on the good graces of our administration, we have the ability to have a member who's struggling with substance be able to possibly go inpatient if clinically necessary. And when they return, we have what we now call the addiction transition program. So those individuals can go from an atmosphere of a 28-day inpatient program to a 5-day-a-week, basically an intensive outpatient program prior to moving into back to the firehouse.
So between the two of you, you came kind of in different periods, although within the same decade per se. I started in 2001 with the EAP and peer support. Was the reception by the membership the same? And same question in regards to the administration.
I think what slowly but surely the stigma has been lifted here in New York. And I really do see that around the country, Dan. I mean, you and I have been doing this long enough where 10 years ago, we'd be doing a presentation at the Redmond or somewhere else, and we'd have 5 people in the room that they're interested in mental health. The room's packed now. People understand the importance of the work that's being done around the country and need for supporting our members. So I would say it's been a gradual lifting of the stigma, but over the last 2 or 3 years, it's really snowballed, where anyone that's involved in the fire service understands the importance of the work that has to be done.
Yeah, so just tell me kind of briefly from back in 2000 or before 2000, what the climate was.
Well, I think most of the people that came to us had substance abuse issues. So we had a large group that came because they could no longer work because of their substance use. And then we had 2 or 3 line of duty deaths a year. And so there were 2 different groups that we would work with. On September 11th, 2001, before that day, we had 6 line of duty deaths that year. So we were working, our peer support was working with the families and the firefighters around line of duty deaths. And that really went back into the early 90s. Has the climate changed? Yes. But I don't think you can look at one date that it changed. I think it's been a gradual increase in the ability for us to do our work.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
And before we get on to Gary, just real quickly, Drew, you came in after 9/11, and I'm kind of curious. Did the program get bolstered after 9/11 as a result? And are you part of that increase. Is that what I
Well,
understand?
yes, prior, Frank can answer to that as well. Prior to September 11th, basically September 10th, I believe there was only 12 to 14 members assigned to the unit, and that was including civilian staff and the uniform members. And it was, I guess, 1994 when I first got on, we were completely separate, EMS and fire, and then that merged. So that brought both EAPs together around that time. Then, of course, 2001, September 11th occurred, and it grew enormously, like Frank had said, up to 90 employees, 6 different locations. And yes, that was part of me going to the substance abuse program. I think, to piggyback what Frank said, getting on in 94 to 2001, the only experience that I really had with the counseling service unit was when we had Ted Frett, who was a former counselor, came in when I was in the Proby school and just told us about the counseling service unit. He said, one of you might need this in your career. And, being a Proby new firefighter, you kind of just, shrug it off, never knowing what was going to occur down the line. And that was my only experience. And then, up until 2001, it was obviously very effective. And then 2001, it just grew, where they took the actual substance abuse program and they separated it due to, confidentiality concerns. So if you came in with a line of duty death, marital issues, possible anxiety, depression, or the PTSD associated with 9/11, you weren't going to see the individuals that were suffering with substance. They separated 2 programs, and we still operate that way today.
One of the conversations that we have, Frank and Drew, is that, you guys been through a lot. We always say more people, more problems. The problems across the country aren't any different in Fairfax and Snohomish and Chicago and Boston and whatever, just the numbers. The question is where's the support? How do we address it? What's the components? I wanted to have you guys on here because people look at you as the leaders, but the reality is what we talk about is the greater majority of organizations probably can't have the FDNY Counseling Center. So with that said, Jerry, kind of share with us in regards to the beginning of the number of people that you represent, why you got involved, and where the support came from. And obviously I know your brother Pat, and it came from him as well, who's now with the International that drives the direction of behavioral health for the 3,200 locals. So share with us a little bit about that.
Well, I got started because I went through the program, and like a lot of people in behavioral health, a lot of us that have been through it successfully want to give back. And we got back into the program and worked with the development, the peer support. You truly understand the fact that you're dealing with not problem firefighters, but firefighters with a problem. And I think when Frank was talking about the stigma is lifted a lot for us because we see the success rate. We see guys who are struggling, you could see them in the morning coming into work to now coming up in the top 5 of promotional exams, top 50 on promotional exams, succeeding in their career. And it was due to addressing their issues and the support that the department has offered for behavioral health. Numerous success rates in the peers, they look at it and they say, hey, Joe down there, what a great job he's been doing since he went through behavioral health or EAP or substance abuse treatment. And so we've glorified this behavioral health too. It can really help the individual succeed and have a successful career. Our department is very supportive. We have a behavioral health manager, EAP, peer support. So those components together I think what helps us to have our success in our program.
And with those components, they're paid positions. Are they internal or external?
They're paid internal. The only external we have is EAP. We contract that out. But we're getting better to where now firemen can go to their own clinician, and we will accept their recommendations and their status reports for those firefighters that are going there. So it works out for us to the benefit. And our guys live so far out that we can also put them in a place closer to their home.
And
I would-
you've been,
Go
oh,
ahead.
go ahead.
No, go ahead, Dan.
You've been a part of your peer support for how long?
About 15 years, 14 years.
Okay, and so what does that look like and what size is your department?
1,800.
Okay,
Very good, very good. It's a attraction of people who've gone through it, stick around, and are the foundation as the IFF peer support. You see those groups, and they're just excited to be there, and they want to help their department, and we utilize those members to continue on. So it is a success.
and that's volunteer or paid?
It's volunteer for positions like me, but we do have paid counselors and a paid director. And then we have our OHC, which is all paid, occupational health safety.
Rob, you wanted to jump
Yeah, I
in?
was just tying into Jerry was saying about distance. That always seems to be a problem, especially I know on my side of the country, it's not uncommon for firefighters to live 100, 200 miles away from where they're working because of our 24-hour shift. So, Frank, does the FDNY have their own counselors? And if so, does that require the firefighter or EMS employee to come in, or can they do what Jerry's talking about and have a counselor outside of work?
Yeah, so both. I mean, we have licensed counselors that work at our locations, and our locations are spread around the New York area, so it's convenient for most of our firefighters and EMTs. But if they want to go to their own clinician, that's fine. So we have a referral list. But I think we're hitting on something here is that as we go around the country with peer support, the IFF training, it's to find culturally competent clinicians is probably the most difficult task and that departments are having, particularly in rural communities. I was doing a peer training in Indiana, about an hour from Indianapolis a couple of weeks ago, and that's what we kept on going back to. Who are the clinicians that we can send our members to when they need the support?
Well,
So-
and to add to that, Ben, I see Bobby Halton just popped in on the screen and is joining us. But I want to keep this moving forward with the EAP. My experience in my smaller organization, our EAP is external as well, is that we're seeing new docs, new counselors that have very little experience. So we have this struggle of trying to find the right clinician or the right counselor to help a firefighter out. Is this something that you guys in FDNY or down in Fairfax, are you guys seeing the same problem, and how do you guys dealing with it?
I think, like Frank said, doing the IFF peer support training, that's the number one issue that comes up, is usually members can find somebody to go to, but when they've gone to one or two sessions, they realize that this person is maybe a well-trained clinician. However, dealing with somebody in the fire service is not something that they're too adept at. What I know, the IFF has looked into different things about doing courses for training clinicians, having online courses like familiarity courses. A lot of departments will invite clinicians in from their EAP to give them like a ride along, which is beneficial. However, sitting in a room with somebody one-on-one is a lot different than just, going out on the rig and experiencing what we do every day as firefighters. Some places I've gone, they've even been very, very creative because it's become such a problem. I did a training down in Texas. I don't remember the town. It was outside of Houston. And the peer lead there, the individual that was taking on the role of setting up their peer program, actually went to the local university and went to their social work department or their psychology department. This is something that I tell other, classes that we teach and other members that I get involved with, go there, because sometimes they are open to having somebody like a speaker come in from peer support, from a department, saying, this is what we see. This is what our members are experiencing on a day-to-day basis. Would you be interested in working with this population? And then if they do, obviously they can get some, more guidance from individuals on that peer support team. Or, we're lucky enough to have some firefighters that are clinicians like myself. We have five or six of them. So that helps. So when we are vetting other clinicians, we kind of know from both sides of the coin, which sometimes isn't always a benefit, but we can at least guide another clinician in the right direction.
So one of the things that I think is in the top of, in regards to EAP, peer support, or the clinician for the peer support team, or referrals, we talk about cultural competency. Obviously, we have that because we're from that. But I'll be honest with you, you look back, right, Frank, back in '92 when the IFF Labor EAP Committee put together their EAP packet, and they said, we'll get an EAP. And they gave them some direction. But back when we even started and did peer support and EAP internally, we didn't have a lot of clinicians that were culturally competent. So what I don't want to do, and I don't want people to do, is talk bad about people. Because if you look at everybody that wears the patch on their arm is a firefighter, but no two firefighters are the same. What do we have to do to make that firefighter the best firefighter? One of the things that Rob does with the Fools organization is what? Education and train. What I think we failed to do in the beginning is say, listen, we have to get out in front of this in regards to EAP and peer support and awareness. We have people that are clinically trained, but we can get them to another level. And one of the things that I know for us is that, like, when we get together, why do we connect? Not all firefighters, right, that sit in a room at a kitchen table, engine, truck, squad, EMS, so forth, always get along. So we should expect that clinically as well. So what I'm saying is that I know from our department, from Chicago, we've done our due diligence to make sure to vet out these resources. And just because they don't fully, if they're not a firefighter or a police officer or a military vet or have somebody in their family, doesn't mean they can't be the best or one of the best. I think we could talk about Susie Gulliver, who's the consultant for the IFF that worked with Boston, before that with the VA, but before that really didn't have that cultural awareness, but got it over, about 15 or 20 years, Frank?
Yeah, I think, again, I think that's something clinicians that work with trauma usually have experience. I mean, usually it's not out of school that you become a good trauma therapist. So it takes time. And we're fortunate here in New York to be able to kind of bring people along, or have, like Drew said, clinicians that were firefighters. So that's really helpful, but that's really hard to find. You said something also that I think is really important that we shouldn't miss. I mean, where most of our healing comes from is our peers. Is the kitchen table is where most of our healing comes from. We get back from a call, go to that kitchen table, and we heal. And 99% of the time, we don't need a therapist. 99%. This is a great job. I mean, I think
other than Drew needs a therapist.
But I think, we talk so much about all the issues, PTSD and suicide and depression, and those are real and they're serious. It's not falling. This is a great job. We've always been here to help each other and support each other. And what peer support does is kind of just formalize that. It formalizes the way, gives us a little bit more information. It gives us a little bit more resources to be able to help our brothers and sisters.
So any of you, tell me what it looks like to vet out a clinician. I just started my peer team. I have a little bit of knowledge. I took the class. What do I need to do?
I think get on the phone or go meet him or her in person and see if you like them. You know, if you think that they would get along. You're not going to necessarily find that culturally competent person right away. But if in a conversation, if they seem like they can get along with firefighters and EMTs, that's a really good start. And then try them out. Maybe try them out yourself. All of us could use a little tune-up. Go in and speak with them and see if they would be helpful. You know, if you're in Chicago and New York, you'll everywhere you walk, you trip over a psychologist.
Like a lawyer.
You know, if you're somewhere else, you're not going to have that luxury.
I think one of the other things also is the availability. When we talk and do the classes, knowing kind of both cultures, right? We're 24/7 animals. You know, when someone calls in the middle of the night, we're going. So firefighters, inherently, and EMTs, first responders in general, they sometimes want that from a therapist, and they have to understand that in that professional world, that's not always possible. Obviously, you know, with crisis intervention and emergency needs, that might be something different where you have peers, but the availability of a clinician is, to me, is paramount. It is after, you know, like Frank said about being able to sit down and talk to somebody. You can sit with anybody. Just because you go to school doesn't make that you're a qualified clinician. But I think if you call them and you set up a meeting and they're on time, or if they're not, they're respectful to let somebody know that. Most of the times, you know, talking to individuals, that's one of their biggest complaints. You know, I went there and they made me wait for 20 minutes. And I understand that does happen, and we have to be realistic about that. But when it happens multiple times, it's not such the best situation for the client. Also, when we refer out, I always get feedback from the actual client, you know, and remember, obviously, that's the individual that's struggling with the situation. So their viewpoint might be skewed somewhat. You know, with the cultural competency and vetting somebody out, like Frank said, you're not always going to get that. That's a perfect combination. But if you get somebody that can take a glimpse into the world and try to understand it. When I first went through school and I came back and I worked here for a while, and then I started running the substance abuse program, probably one of the best compliments I got, and somebody didn't realize, they didn't know I was a fireman. So I kind of felt like I had honed my skills as a clinician to the point where this guy didn't even know I was a fireman. And I took that more as a compliment, and he felt that he insulted me. I said, no. I said, I was able to help you on a level that was, didn't need that buy-in. So that would bring me to the other point of that, is that when a member is in need, unless that clinician is somebody that we've vetted and, said, no, this is not good. But when a member is in need and there's somebody there willing to listen, they're going to talk to that individual. That's one thing that I've learned. When they're hurting enough and are the bar for what we set for when we're going to go talk to somebody, obviously is a little different than the general population. Good or bad, everybody has their opinion on that. But when it's time and the individual goes, you want to make sure that clinician is available, vet out insurances, things like that, if possible. What are they looking for? You don't want that to come up to be a monkey wrench in the process. And somebody that's, willing to be somewhat available for your membership.
Drew, I think that's a really good point that you bring up. I know a couple times in the last year that we've been dealing with something and dealing with sending an individual to get some treatment, and is the insurance component, and making sure, as we're vetting, making sure that that has been dealt with ahead of time will make for a smoother transition, because the last thing we need is obstacles along the way. Give them an opportunity to say, okay, maybe this isn't for me because it's causing more challenges. And I think that's the responsibility of, be it, it's an IFF agency, it's the responsibility of the union and maybe HR to make sure they dial that shit in quick, and so that we don't have that something to deal with down the road. And to Frank's point earlier about the, what are we looking for in vetting? It's like you could have a competent counselor, clinician, and you still just don't get along. You still just don't have that connection. So I think it's important that we're looking for people, for clinicians and counselors that have some understanding of our profession, that have some background in paramilitaristic but the key is the connection and being able to help the individual work them down the road. I mean, that's ultimately what we're shooting for. So.
And somebody that's not going to, somebody that's not going to keep an individual in treatment unnecessarily. To explain that a little bit more, I mean, we've run into situations, obviously, like everything else, does come down to a business, and people make their living doing it. So we do have a small fund which I oversee, and it's specifically for geographic reasons or specialty reasons that we might send somebody to these different clinicians. But we look into the case. We don't just give that clinician carte blanche. Is there a treatment plan? What is the initial diagnosis? How are we going to move forward? Can you give us a 90-day review of how the individual is doing without being intrusive into the person's confidentiality? Just kind of knowing that this individual they have a plan from taking this person, a beginning, a middle, and an end from point A to point B. If you just leave it wide open, some of these counselors, again, not to point any fingers or anything, but some counselors, they do kind of, okay, this is a fire department. I have kind of a ongoing supply of clients. Let me keep this thing going. So you have to be leery. I know you don't want to have to say that, but in this day and age, you have to watch out for your membership.
Yeah, Drew, you kind of mentioned a couple of things. So vetting out and trying to remove we talk about stigma a lot, but removing the barriers or the ambivalence towards recovery. One thing that you are actually going to do at our symposium is talk about motivational interviewing and the ambivalence to change within somebody. But what I think we try to do as peer supporters and EAPs is remove the obstacles and the barriers for the individuals that are willing to take that first step and reach out for help. And what are those obstacles that we look at? Certainly, we've kind of touched on that: cultural awareness, availability, geography, cost, relationship, and we could keep on going on. One of the things you just mentioned, so you mentioned that you have a fund. That's something that actually about 12 years ago, I talked to our executive board, and we worked in our contract that we get a dollar amount that we earmark for people's treatment to reduce the cost burden on them. We certainly work out relationships with treatment centers and counselors if people are out of network or just don't have the funds because they don't have them, and we want to reduce that barrier. So where does your funds come from? Ours come from a contractual agreement between a union and the city.
So this particular fund that I mentioned was called the Honor Emergency Fund. That was set up, I believe, around the late 20s, early 30s, somewhere around the time of the Depression, believe it or not. There was a doctor that used to be a fire department doctor, and he would respond to help individuals. And he realized when there was a line of duty death, at that time, the city didn't provide the widow and the widow's family with any compensation. It was just sorry, maybe a burial cost, things like that. And he decided, he was a wealthy man, I think it was Dr. Archer was his name, and he put $1 million at that time into a fund, and he said, just don't use the principal and use the interest. Now, that's a unique situation that's obviously been going on for years. It's very, very safeguarded. I go to a meeting once a year and kind of do our proposal for the next grant year, but it has been useful. It's helped the counseling unit, as far as I know, I think since the very beginning, when our former director, Malachi Cargan, well, we started in 66, but around 82, not sure Frank might be able to help us out when it actually started with the Honor Emergency Fund, but that's where that fund comes from. That's where our funding comes from, as far as that covers part of it.
Gotcha. Well, that's great. So thank you for that. Rob, I got a question for you. So one of the big things that certainly New York has not had an issue with is something that we really don't talk about when we start a program, but it's about sustainability. When we talk about in the fire service, you know, we want to get on the job and we want to do stuff, but it takes its toll, certainly physically and you know, emotionally in our marriages. So when we talk about a peer support team, right? Tell us a little bit about your peer support team, and then the idea of sustainability, or if you've even looked at that. And I don't want to offend you, but that's something that when, you know, it's like one of those things, you don't want to start something you can't finish. I know and the reason I ask is because with my department, we have two peer supports, an administrative peer support team and a union peer support team. And some people, unfortunately, have relapsed. Some people have retired. Some people don't feel utilized. And for a variety of different reasons, those numbers fluctuate. So can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, just to kind of give a background a little bit. I mean, like I said at the beginning, I'm a smaller department, and my department is a third the size or half the size of probably what you guys got for your support in your organizations, not just the staffing. I mean, my peer support team is less than an engine company in the FDNY. There's 4 of us on the team, and I coordinate. We have had a few instances. I mean, basically, for us, this came back to a couple of suicides. Most recently was a good friend, and the department wanted to get on board and wanted to do something. Now, outside of the area, because we have other departments that are in our county, we had a school shooting and some other things. And the city of Seattle has a pretty strong peer support team with Kim Leroy down here. She coordinates it. So we had a pretty easy upbringing to start things off. So the 4 of us moving forward, I think I got put in the coordinator position just because of my title. But the one thing that my team really enjoys, and this is not just a real quick, easy softball throw to, or a toss to, that we love going to the Rosecrans Symposium, to promote that. But we love reaching out and getting education together. So for us, and helping us move forward and keeping us motivated and sustaining our team is, one, continued education that all members are involved in. And we're fortunate because there's only 4 of us. We all go together. We're all doing it together. And that really helps out. Moving forward for us, we're merging with a couple other departments. They have another team. So we'll probably double in size. I probably have 10 people in the waiting wanting to join. And I'm a little reluctant to bring more people on the team, because then that we're not that busy. I mean, we get an occasional, hey, can you check on this person? And we help people out, but we're definitely not the size of an organization that we're doing this on a regular basis. So I don't want to make the team too big, but I want to keep people active, and I want to, make sure that anybody who wants to participate and wants to seek the training, and I think is important. And with our merger and everything that's going on, my goal is I'd love to see us become more of a regional team, kind of along the lines that Dina has going on in North Carolina, and get away from a specific department team and work more as a larger organization. So that's our goal moving forward. Like I said, I think the biggest thing is continued training and keeping the team active. It's just like anything else that we do. If you're not active, you're gonna lose motivation.
Jerry, we're talking about sustainability for peer support team. What have you seen over the years in regards to your team that either barriers or that's kept it going?
That's a perfect point on that. Would be the members. We need the members and the successfulness of the members to get involved into a program that continued either their sobriety or their success in the fire department. That's huge for us to have input from those members.
And one of the things we talk about in the IFF peer support training is a chief and a champion. Do you have an identified champion on your team?
Absolutely. We've had numerous individuals who've gone through either PTSD, significant marriage problems, to substance abuse problems that really struggled with their career in the fire service. And after years of support, have risen through the ranks. So that helps our program because now we have supporters in admin roles high up. The decision making, the policy makers are now seeing the success or have been through this program and received the success. And a lot of them owe it all to a good, solid behavioral management program. Without it, they would have been probably terminated or worse. And we know what that worse is because that's where some of our members were. And that success rate, it really helps us.
Frank and Drew, can you speak of that sustainability of your program?
Yeah, I think it's important, and not only for our program, for any program, is it cannot be personality dependent. It can't be one individual that is running with the ball, but it has to be embedded in the department itself. It has to become part of the fabric of the department. Just like we take care of our rigs and take care of our equipment, we have to have a program that is that we have protocols, we have standard operating procedures for. It has to be embedded into the department. So when you leave, or when I leave, when Drew leaves, when Jerry leaves, that the program doesn't fall apart. And we've seen that all too often. We've seen this great program start because you have a champion. The champion is promoted, leaves, retires, whatever, and then the program falls apart. We have to look at the program and make sure that it's embedded in the department.
And then also financially funding it also.
Sure.
I mean, we need the fire chief and the senior staff to support. Remember, Frank, and me, you, Will, we went to a large East Coast fire department, and the fire chief bought in, total buy-in. But he's like, where am I getting the money? I'm browning out six engine companies a day.
Yep.
I have no money. We need to make sure that it's a budgeted position, budgeted part of our fire service.
Yeah, and what, hopefully, we've seen over the last 10 years the stigma left around behavioral health, and hopefully 10 years from now, we're not talking about behavioral health. We're talking about total wellness, where we're not singling out just the behavioral issues. We're talking about physical fitness, medical, and behavioral health all in one equation, and that's firefighter wellness. And just like you hurt your shoulder and you get medical care for that. If you have depression or PTSD, it's the same thing. So, many fire departments have annual medicals, maybe they have annual emotional, tests or whatever. So hopefully it's in one silo, not in these silos, behavioral health, medical, and physical fitness in the future.
Drew, you got anything to say?
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, I look at it like mind, body, soul, like the three-pronged approach to the behavioral health world and the physical and the spirit. There's enormous amounts of research that is being done out there, not necessarily connected to firefighters or first responders, just the general population, how all these things are connected, right? How your mind and your body work together. And like Frank said, if you do look at from just my short involvement in this, we have, in my opinion, it's leaps and bounds. They access our services quite often. Frank will get a call, I'll get a call, which I think is extremely different than when I first got around, even here, and definitely from 1994. I think that's a testament to the peer program, to making it okay to seek out the help, to getting that administration buy-in. I think cultivating new talent is something that we struggle with here. We have a much better educated workforce with the technology available at their fingertips. I saw a show the other day. They said most iPhones and most phones now are 3 times more powerful than the first computer that was ever built. So people do a lot of research before they come forward, which is good. So we're getting a much more educated consumer. It'd be nice to say that almost like Frank was saying, like we put ourselves out of business, that people become that healthy and it just becomes synonymous. There was a lot of legislation passed in the Obama administration, and even prior to that, to try to get parity between the physical health and mental health. Ironically, and unfortunately, that hasn't come to fruition. We've seen epidemics of opioids. We've seen, at epidemic levels of suicide. I think we've had 7 New York City police officers have taken their own life in the past several months. That's unbelievable. And yet the availability of services and the insurance coverages aren't keeping pace with the need. So I think there's even a bigger conversation there. But as far as the fire service, I think that sustainability and that, we are looking at the next generation of this. When I do trainings, I a lot of times I look for I say, okay, who's the youngest guy in the room? And you'll get that young firefighter, 24, 25. I go, this is your responsibility to carry this thing forward as things were given to us. And I think we're getting there. I think we still have some more work. But to have the conversation now about someone going to receive couples counseling or trouble because they're feeling a little depressed, those conversations now are being had at the kitchen table, where they weren't before. Definitely, I know when I got on, and I'm sure, I think I might actually be the youngest one here. I'm not sure about that, but when I first got on, if you had if you had a job, if you had what we called a roast, right? That was a civilian fatality, to depersonalize away from it. We didn't even give it a name. That was the name. And they'd stop and they'd get a square box, which, a case of beer, and okay, you kind of broke your cherry, kid. Here you go. Obviously, we've learned over the years that's not the best way to handle it. So it's definitely moving forward. Still some work to be done, though.
So just on social media there, this last week, there's been, it's been moving around a little bit. The IFF Center of Excellence put out I guess it was an article about it's okay to call in sick for behavioral health. So that kind of leads to the next question for all of us that are involved in peer support. What do you do to manage burnout on team members? We'll start with Jerry.
The old saying, you need to take care of yourself before you can take care of others, is true. After a busy day, a bunch of calls, and you get a phone call from another member, you got dinner in the oven, you got all your reports to do, you got everything else going on. It's hard. Sorry. It's hard. It'll go out. Our tones stay on for about 3 minutes. I'll come back. There it goes. You need to take care of yourself. You need to take care of your members physically, because you get a phone call after hours and you're just like, you don't want that phone call, but you take it. Are you as sincere as you would if you hadn't been running calls all day? You would have given more time. So sometimes I find myself addressing it and then having to call back like 30 minutes later and following up and say, hey, I'm sorry, my mind was a little bit distracted. I need to, what else do you need? Let's sit down and talk to it. You can get burned out real quick. I know that. So you need to take care of yourself, whether it's through meditation, religion, a walk on the beach, somewhere where you can get your solace and get your mind straight, because you need to be healthy to take care of somebody else.
Excellent. Perspective, Bobby, you want to chime in on this?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of great information that's been shared. One of the things that resonated with me particularly was when Frank mentioned, one of the things to keep in mind is you don't want to create the one-room schoolhouse, right? You don't want to make people feel predestined or predetermined to have issues when they may not. Or one of the other things to remember too is that people throw around words like PTSD without having a real understanding that that's a clinical diagnosis, and all you folks know what that entails, right? Depending on who you look at, the Mayo Clinic or whatever agency is defining it. But generally speaking, there's real parameters to that have behavioral stuff that needs to be documented and dealt with in a treatment plan. But all of us, as we go through life, as Frank said much more eloquently, are going to struggle with different things from different times, and some of it's codependent stuff, and your alcohol dose leads to this, or maybe an emotional reaction leads to the alcohol or drugs or whatever. So there's that, but life is a struggle. I mean, one of the great oddities of presentism that we have now is that people think their life should be free from any kind of anxiety or struggle. Well, good luck with that, and as soon as you move out of your mom's basement, let me know how it works out for you. But but for most of us that are going through life, and especially in the fire service or law enforcement or careers where we have to deal with the public in very emotional and difficult times, are going to absorb some of that, right? But one of the things that Frank said, and it's called post-traumatic growth these days, that's the name Tedeschi and Calhoun gave in the 90s. That's a real thing. For us, what we're so blessed with is this incredibly vibrant culture of like-minded people that want to help, but also have very similar interests. Like most of us are kind of mechanically inclined, and most of us are kind of, into a similar kind of subset of activities that make for a good firefighter. Duh. You know what I mean? And generally we share those, whether it's hunting, fishing, camping, softball, all the crazy stuff that we tend to do as a culture that keeps us happy and connected, right? And I think Joyner calls it belongingness in his books on suicide. He calls it belongingness and such. And I think that's a really important takeaway from this conversation, is that counseling and stuff is kind of a second to what I think Frank called it the kitchen table. The kitchen table is probably the first stop in a peer support group, and a good kitchen table group of men and women around the table going, "Hey, how you doing today, kid?" And, "I'm good." How good are you? You look a little gloomy there, sport. And over a cup of coffee, maybe that works it all out. For others, it gets a little deeper, and then maybe you call Frank, or you call Derek, or you call Gary, or you call Rob, and say, "Man, it's really bugging me, and I got to go deeper," and that's great, and I think it's really important, and I think that the stigma side of it, and Dan and I have talked about this as huge sociocultural roots that go back obviously generations. You can go all the way back to the eugenics movement, which I unfortunately did in a speech one time, and people thought I was just bloody nuts, but I am, and so anyway. You can't take us out of our culture, right? I mean, we use word like nuts, we use word like crazy, and we use the word moron, which came from IQ tests, which were used to identify people for sterilization, which is, you talk about stigma, when they start going after little Bobby, it catches your attention, right? So, we're never going to cure all the society's ills, and everybody is so different, man. And we got to respect that. And what I really love about this group, and what I love about the whole movement of, and it is a movement of wellness. It's not a movement about treating people that are broken. It's a movement about total wellness. And I love when Derek said, look, it's about what you eat. It's about how you connect spiritually. And I don't care if you're Catholic or Lutheran, or you pray to the spaghetti monster. Good for you. Whatever it is that keeps you grounded, whether it's you just dig Mother Earth, that's cool. So anyway, wonderful conversation. It's been great to listen to all of you. And I just, on behalf of the great unwashed out here who are not clinicians and just a regular dumb old firefighter, thank you for what you're doing. And thank you for being there for us, because I don't care who you are. Nobody's Superman or Superwoman. I think our good friend Pat Kinney does that great talk, and yet we act like it, and it can jam us up. It's okay to say, man, I'm in a funk. I'm having a bad day. I don't know. I feel like a Volkswagen in the sand, man. I got no traction. And then, sometimes it's something bigger, sometimes it's not. But we all know it's like a job, right? If you can get in fast and get to the scene of the fire, it's not a bad job. If it's a top floor fire and you got to make a couple of floors, right, Frank, and you got all those implements in front of you, those are a pain in the butt, because by the time you get there, you got a bad fire. You know what I mean? And so if you let those little fires go too long, it can jam you up. Stop at the kitchen table. If the kitchen table doesn't work, get to the peer guys. If the peer guys don't work. And the other thing, I think Gary, you said it best when you're talking. I apologize, I'm old, but somebody said, it's about the relationship, right? And I don't think that all our clinicians, this is just me, I don't think all our clinicians need to be, into the job or know anything about us. Sometimes it's just a person you can talk to because you dig them, right? And they dig you. And like, that's it's cool if they know who we are and what we do and all that. And I get it. And being, what did Dan say it? They're enculturated or whatever. I totally get that. That's cool. But man, sometimes there's just like some really cool people out there who don't know anything about us, but just they actually care about you. And that might be good enough, right? So I wouldn't discount any clinician that one of our folks says, hey, I want to talk to, Ashley Wakadaka. If that's the person they want to talk to, let them talk to Ashley. If they want to talk to Dan DeGrice, let them talk to Dan. So I don't know. That's just me. But again, thank you. And thank you for doing this. I love you all. Thank you.
Hey, Bobby, to your point, I mean, we seek guidance from a priest or, a pastor or whatever, whatever church it is. And they're not on the job with us likely. And we share experiences and we look for their guidance and help us. So, I mean, I totally agree with you. The connection, though, of trying to find counselors that understand the job is an aspect of it. But I think the connection is probably more important. So I know we're down to this last couple minutes, and I just got a message from Danny. So I'll turn it over to Danny. We can do our closing comments.
Well, the last time I went over at FDIC, I got yelled at from Bobby's side. It's not really pleasant. I mean, he was very calm right there. So, Bob, thanks for jumping in and being a part. It's remarkable because I've known Frank and Drew and Jerry for a long time. Bob, Rob, I've known for actually a short time, but we've had an instant connection. Bobby, I've known for 5 years. We could talk about this all day, and what I don't want to do, and which I don't think we have been doing, is put in a negative spin on this. That's something that Bobby and I have talked about over the last couple of years, is that we do have post-traumatic growth. We do have success. Jerry says it, the best in the sense of he is a perfect example of it, and the people around him and the administration. One thing that we've learned from rehab, not rehab in a sense of drugs and alcohol, but rehab in the fire service, is that if you're thirsty, you're getting closer to dehydration, and that's going to affect you. So drink before you're thirsty. So what we're trying to do, and you have all done, and we could go back to 9/11, right? Frank, is that nobody foresaw that. That was there's still lasting effects, and that's going to go on for a long time. What we want to do is get out in front of this, say that people are resilient, are capable, and like you mentioned, the kitchen table. If we're, one of the reasons we moved away from CISM was because it was reactionary. The debriefings and diffusings, which I still think have a place in a sense of interaction. But if people aren't, if leaders, if officers, if the barn boss, if the chief of the officer organization, if Bobby Halton, if the Fools organization, if FDIC, if the chiefs organization don't make this the fabric every single day, we will lose. We will have issues. So to end on a high note, kind of share with me your last thoughts. If I'm new or old in the peer support and EAP and trying to get my head around this, or my department around this, tell me what I need to know in a couple minutes, and then also just tell me one of your success stories. Now, I know we're at our hour, but if we could just take a couple of minutes and just answer those two questions, because that's why I've been in it, because of the success, and that's kind of what Jerry said. So anybody shoot it off.
I'll start off with real quick, and it still sticks out in my mind. Firefighter, 2 a.m. calls me. He's in a little park outside his apartment building, and on his laptop is a suicide note. And he had all the answers, and I stayed with him for about 3-4 hours. Finally, 2 things he said he didn't want to be is institutionalized and medicated. By 10 o'clock that next morning, he was both, and he was a happy man. He just got promoted. In fact, he's assigned to my house now. And That's a huge successful story for reaching out. And it works. If you work, if you do it, you work it, the program will work, and we will help our fellow firefighters. We just need to be nice. Thanks.
Dan?
Anybody?
Yeah, Dan, it's Frank. 36 years ago, I became a firefighter, and I took the greatest job in the world. And there's been a lot of highs and lows in those 36 years. But I still think that as a firefighter, I made the right choice. And I think this is a great profession. I think we have the opportunity to help others. We work with the greatest men and women that God created. So I think it's important to let the members know, or people that are coming on the department, to know that this is a wonderful occupation. There are going to be some bumps in the road, and I see the success of our program every single day. Every single day, I see us supporting members that are down on their luck, or having a hard time, or really struggling. So, and I think that's going to be more and more. I think more departments, there's 33,000 departments in the country. I think they're catching on. And as good as this job is, it's going to get better.
Big Drew?
Yeah, I think, like Frank said, it being a great job, I think one of the things that I learned, and I think that I would pass along to others, we got your back. That's something that I learned when I got on this job. I think I didn't know what it meant until probably the first couple of fires that I went to. I got on, and 22 months into my career at my first firehouse, my mother passed away, and every member of that company showed up. It was 207-110, and they all showed, and I was floored because I didn't come from that world, and I never had seen anything like that. It was almost surreal. Fast forward to a couple of years ago when my dad passed away, the same thing. I mean, people that I knew, people that I had worked with years ago, people that heard, and it was a horrendous snowstorm here, and people showed up. And I think that's the innate quality that's in all of us, like Bobby just mentioned. We're all a little mechanical. Well, except Frank, just to can't do it like he'll say that to himself. But just to know that we all got each other's back, I mean, that's an unbelievable feeling to know that when you're going to work, if something like I walk, we drive around this city, and I know, shit, if something happens, I'll call Frank. I'll call, we got it. Nothing's been is going to overtake us. I think on a personal note, as far as what I find most gratifying, ironically, it's when I'm walking around on our floor up here. We have a lot of members that are struggling with addiction, and they're working. And on Wednesdays we do an alumni meeting, and it just happened when I was coming in here, and I was coming in to shut my door, and I heard one of the guys who was struggling for many years said to one of the younger guys, well, they were about the same age. He's like, hey, bro, he goes, you don't have to feel like that anymore. So I immediately opened up the door. I said, what did you just say? He's like, I told him he doesn't have to feel that way anymore. And I gave the guy a big hug, kind of with the little bust in his chops a little bit. But that to me is gratifying when I can see somebody that came in that was in a really untenable place and was able on his own with some guidance from us, just steering him in the right direction. We have no magic bullet. We have no magic touch. We're just here. Like Bobby said, just one human being listened to another. It's been going on for a long time. And to hear that guy then give it back to somebody else, that's the kind of things that definitely, the little things like that choke me up in this profession. So, and thank you for having me. That chokes me up too, that you thought of me to include me in this. I appreciate that.
Well, I'm going to share something I'm going to ask Bobby. So as you guys, what I want people to know is that this can be successful, but it needs people like yourselves. That's, again, you guys, whether or not you like it or not, you're the leaders. Bobby is, and Rob and Jerry, and we typically do stuff behind the scenes. We don't want the recognition. I know Frank asked how much we're getting paid for this, and it's Bob, are we getting a raise? He's gone.
Danny, I'm right here. I was muted. Whatever I'm paying you guys, double it.
Many of us,
Zero.
many of us that have done this not for the money, but for the satisfaction. One experience that I had was unfortunately dealing with somebody at about 2:00 in the morning that was suicidal. A larger, much larger man than I, and we had 4 people in there just to maintain some civility. The good news is he did not die by suicide that night. However, 2 weeks later, he did attempt it. The good thing from that thing was he was unsuccessful. And a year later, I got an email from him saying, "Hey, I know I've had some struggles and you've dealt with me over, really the relationship was over 5 years. This addiction and mental health and suicide stuff isn't like a fire that just goes out one time. It's unfortunately goes on many times." And the emails basically stated, "I might have let you down 2 weeks later, but I want to let you know that if you didn't intervene in my life that day at the bar, I would be dead." So it's powerful. With that said, Bobby, you got any comments, last comments, and Rob?
No, I'd just like to say thank you to you all, and I hope that anybody out there who's listening, and please, I know Frank, and I know Drew, and I know Gary and Dan, Rob, be happy to help you get the program started. Be happy to point you in the right direction if it's for you. You don't have to be an FDNY member to reach out to Frank. I know Frank and I have known each other a long time, and you can get a hold of him. He's easy to find online. Just Google him. Same thing with Dan. You can find Dan easy. Reach out to no matter who you are. But if you feel like you need to talk to somebody, just reach out. And these guys will keep it between you and them, and they'll be there for you. And Drew, you're exactly right. It's and what scares me more than anything is we're and here we are on this electronic platform talking to each other over some kind of devices, but there's nothing like when you are sitting face to face with somebody and they're actually looking at you and listening, and that human to human thing, it's huge. And these guys will find some human that you can connect with locally if they have to, or they'll sit on the phone with you till you're okay. And full disclosure, I've been there. I've called Dan, and he's talked me off the ledge more than once. And when we met 5 years ago, my family was going through some really tough stuff, and he never ever abandoned us, and still working with us today. So you can trust these guys.
Thanks, Bobby. Rob?
Yeah, I would say that this dealing with a lot of this is kind of like dealing with a balloon frame construction house, and that you're going to be chasing fire for a while if you don't take care of it from an overhaul standpoint, to kind of put a twist on it, firefighter twist. So when we are dealing with some of these issues that some of our members are into, there's a good chance they're going to come back. And I think everybody that's on here has plenty of stories to say that the first time wasn't resolved the first time, and we had to continue on. So be persistent with your members, stay connected with them, do good overhaul, and give them an opportunity to kind of identify a lot of those things. And lastly, it just reach out and get rest, take care of yourselves. Get good sleep. We could talk for hours, so I'll just stop there. Thank you for having me on.
All right. Well, we're going to sign off here. What I do want to, get my tongue out of my mouth. Thanks for being here, everybody. Hopefully it was beneficial to the people out in Fire Engineering Nation. Frank and Drew, I was hoping that maybe you could be a little bit vulnerable when we sign off. And kind of share the other side of your personalities in life and show what you showed me earlier.
Yeah, I don't think so. I'll always take that opportunity.
Okay, in order to avoid any lawsuits, I think we ought to wrap it up now. Knuckleheads.
All
Dan,
right, thanks, guys.
Thank you very much, guys. It was a real pleasure, real honor. Thank you.
We'll see you next time.
bye-bye all.
Thanks all.